Sir, my mother took this boy in, and he grew up alongside me. Camilla's scream reverberated through the mansion like a clap of thunder, causing Richard Hamilton to lose his grip on the coffee cup he'd been holding. The 29-year-old housekeeper stood transfixed before the enormous portrait in the main hall, her cleaning cloth abandoned at her feet as she trembled violently, as though she'd encountered a specter. The Czech crystal vase exploded against the Italian marble flooring, sending fragments and dark liquid cascading everywhere. Richard's gaze moved from the shattered mess on the floor to Camilla, who stood pointing at the painting with a quivering finger, tears carving paths down her cheeks. "Have you lost your mind?" Richard erupted, the vein at his temple pulsing visibly. "What kind of hysterical nonsense is this? And that vase you just destroyed cost $300. It's coming out of your pay." But Camilla wasn't listening. Her eyes remained locked on the portrait of a young man with golden hair dressed in an impeccable suit, wearing that same bashful smile she'd known throughout her childhood. David, her David, the boy her mother, Donna Rosa, had welcomed into their home when he'd appeared lost and terrified in their neighborhood at just 7 years old. "David Hamilton," she whispered, reading the brass nameplate mounted beneath the painting. "Your son is the same David who lived with us for 5 years. Richard's face drained of all color. Something in her voice, the absolute conviction, the unwavering certainty, made him stop his tirade mid-breath. "My son died in an accident when he was 12, he said, though his voice lacked its previous steadiness. Camilla wiped away her tears and met his gaze directly. "David didn't die, Mr. Hamilton. He was taken. Kidnapped right in front of our house by a man in an expensive suit who claimed to be from social services. My mother tried to stop them, but they had documents that looked official. We never saw him again after that day." The silence that descended was profound and suffocating. Richard studied the woman who had cleaned his home for 2 years, always quiet, always deferential. And for the first time, he truly saw her. There was a strength burning in her eyes that he'd never noticed before, a resolve that couldn't be ignored. "That's impossible," Richard murmured, but his legs buckled slightly, forcing him to steady himself against a leather armchair. "David was attending St. Andrew's Academy when..." "When what, Mr. Hamilton?" Camilla took a deliberate step forward, and something fundamental had shifted in her bearing. She was no longer the submissive employee. She had transformed into a woman who had just discovered a crucial piece of the puzzle that had haunted her for 17 years. "Do you genuinely believe your son died? Or was that simply what they wanted you to believe?" Richard felt the room tilt around him. Memories he deliberately buried began clawing their way to the surface. The private investigators who'd stopped returning his calls, the body that was never recovered, the social worker who'd insisted on immediate cremation citing public health concerns, the mounting pressure to accept his son's death and move forward with his life. "Prove it," he demanded, his voice hoarse. "If what you're saying is true, prove it to me." Camilla extracted her cell phone from her pocket with hands that had stopped shaking. "I have photographs, Mr. Hamilton. I have the birth certificate my mother kept when David first arrived at our door. And I have something that will make you understand the story runs much deeper and darker than you could possibly imagine." She paused, observing the increasingly pale face of a man who had humiliated her daily for 2 years. And for the first time since accepting this position, she smiled, a smile without warmth or submission. "But first, I need to know, are you truly prepared to discover who stole your son from you? Because once you learn the truth, your life will be irrevocably changed." Richard swallowed with difficulty. There was something in this woman's expression that warned him he was about to uncover a terrible secret buried for nearly 2 decades. Richard Hamilton examined Camilla as though she were a particularly irritating insect that had invaded his pristine home. "You honestly expect me to believe that a housekeeper possesses information about my son that I, with unlimited resources at my disposal, couldn't obtain?" He crossed to the crystal bar, pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey from a bottle worth over $100, offering her nothing. "You know what your problem is? People like you always invent dramatic stories to make yourselves seem important." He took a long sip before continuing. "David Hamilton attended the most prestigious private school in this city. He had personal tutors, moved in social circles you couldn't even dream of accessing." Camilla remained perfectly still, tracking his every movement with calculating eyes. David was just a frightened child who appeared in our neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon, crying, wearing torn designer clothes with no memory of how he'd gotten there. That's a lie. Richard slammed his glass onto the mahogany table with enough force to crack it. My son would never have been in a neighborhood like the one where you live. Of course not, Mr. Hamilton. Camilla's voice was dangerously composed. Because you don't even know where I live, do you? You don't know that I've worked here for 2 full years, cleaning this mansion every single day. To you, I'm completely invisible. Richard rolled his eyes dismissively. Don't be so dramatic. I pay your salary, don't I? I provide you with honest employment. You pay me $300 per week to clean a 15-room mansion, working from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, 6 days a week. Camilla advanced another step, and for the first time, Richard noticed she didn't lower her gaze. That comes to roughly $2 per hour, well below minimum wage, in case you weren't aware. If you're dissatisfied with the arrangement, you're free to seek employment elsewhere. He shrugged, settling back into the leather armchair with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to always having the upper hand. There are hundreds of people who would be grateful for an opportunity like this. Camilla's smile returned, but it held no warmth whatsoever. You're absolutely right, Mr. Hamilton. There are thousands of desperate people who would accept exploitation, but none of them possess what I have. And what exactly would that be? Richard asked, his tone dripping with boredom. The truth about what really happened to David. Richard's entire body tensed. David died in a tragic accident at school. I have the official documents, the death certificate, everything. You have papers that were provided to you by people who needed you to believe that narrative. Camilla pulled a chair forward and sat down without being invited. An act of insubordination that made Richard stiffen with indignation. But you never actually saw his body, did you? The silence that followed provided all the answers she needed. My mother, Donna Rosa, worked as a nanny in wealthy neighborhoods before David appeared in our lives, Camilla continued, ignoring Richard's increasingly ashen complexion. She knew the families intimately. She knew their secrets, the shameful things they needed to keep buried. What secrets? Richard attempted to maintain a superior tone, but his voice wavered slightly, betraying his growing unease. Do you really want to know, or would you prefer to continue living in the comfortable lie they constructed for you? Camilla leaned forward intently. Because once you know the truth, you can never return to ignorance. And something tells me you've grown quite fond of your illusions, Mr. Hamilton. Richard drained the remainder of his whiskey in a single gulp, the amber liquid burning down his throat. Speak plainly. David didn't die at 12, Mr. Hamilton. The words fell like explosives in the silent room. He was sold. Richard's face turned the color of chalk. Sold, he whispered. Sold to whom? To a wealthy family in another state who paid handsomely to acquire a blond, blue-eyed, well-educated son with absolutely no ties to his past. Camilla paused deliberately, watching the horror bloom across his features. My mother overheard the entire conversation. The fake social worker who came to our house was the same person who visited you in the hospital after the accident, Dr. Patricia Kellerman. She worked for a child trafficking ring that specialized in servicing upper-class families. Richard's glass slipped from his nerveless fingers and shattered against the floor. That's impossible. What would be impossible is a housekeeper investigating this case for 17 years, methodically gathering evidence, documents, and recordings. Camilla's smile turned predatory. But then again, you don't know anything about what I'm truly capable of, do you? Richard attempted to stand, but his legs refused to cooperate. You're lying. This is about money, isn't it? You want a payoff. Money? Camilla laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. Mr. Hamilton, when you discover the complete truth, you'll realize that money is the absolute least of your worries. Because if David was sold, then who orchestrated the sale? Who profited? And why were you kept alive to sign those custody transfer documents? The final words struck Richard like physical blows. Suppressed memories began flooding back. The pressure to sign documents quickly for David's sake, meetings with social workers he'd never encountered before, uncomfortable questions about life insurance policies and will provisions. My God, he muttered. The horrifying truth began to take shape in his mind. They needed me alive. To legitimize the sale, Camila finished, an orphan is worth considerably less on the black market than a child officially transferred with legal documentation, even fraudulent documentation. Richard looked at her with completely new eyes. She was no longer the invisible maid he barely acknowledged. She was a woman who had dedicated nearly 2 decades of her life to tracking down a conspiracy that had destroyed 2 families. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "Why would you do this? Why invest so much of your life in this?" Camila rose slowly, moving with quiet dignity to stand before him. "Because David was my brother, Mr. Hamilton, not by blood, but by every measure that truly matters. He called me Sister Cam. I taught him how to ride a bicycle in the vacant lot behind our house. I held his hand during thunderstorms because lightning terrified him." She walked to the window, gazing out at the meticulously manicured gardens that stretched beyond. "And because when they came to take him away at age 12, he looked directly into my eyes and said, 'Cam, please don't let them take me. I want to stay with you.'" Her voice caught, but I was only 15 years old. There was absolutely nothing I could do to stop them. Richard felt something fracture deep inside his chest. And now, Camila turned, and for the first time, Richard saw tears glistening in her eyes. But he also saw something else, an iron determination that made him realize he was facing an absolutely unstoppable force. "Now I've grown up, Mr. Hamilton. Now I know exactly what needs to be done." She paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon light. "The question is, are you prepared to discover who truly destroyed your family? Because when you learn the names, addresses, and bank account numbers, your entire privileged existence will collapse completely around you." As Richard remained frozen in his chair, processing revelations that rewrote his entire reality, a profound truth began to emerge. Perhaps the maid he had dismissed and disrespected for 2 years was the only person in the world who genuinely cared about finding his son alive. Richard ran a trembling hand across his face, struggling to process what he'd just learned. Dr. Patricia Kellerman. That name. I remember her at the hospital. She told me she would handle all the bureaucratic paperwork, so I could focus on my recovery. Exactly. Camila retrieved a worn folder from her cleaning bag, its edges soft from years of handling. "For 17 years, I've gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Falsified certificates, offshore bank accounts, travel records, everything." Richard eyed the papers suspiciously. How could a housekeeper possibly gain access to confidential information like this? The smile that crossed Camila's face was unlike anything Richard had ever witnessed from her. "Mr. Hamilton, do you honestly believe cleaning houses is my only skill? That I've spent 17 years of my life simply dusting furniture and polishing silver?" She spread a series of photographs across the coffee table. Images of bank statements, credit card transactions, property deeds, and wire transfer records. "I have 2 university degrees, Mr. Hamilton, one in computer science and another in criminal investigation. I worked for 5 years as a fraud analyst at major financial institutions before I made the decision to infiltrate your life." Richard's face drained of color once more. "Infiltrate. Did you think it was mere coincidence that I appeared seeking employment at your house?" Camila's laugh held no humor. "I studied your routine for months. I knew your previous housekeeper was planning to retire. I knew you preferred to hire discreet people who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions. I manipulated every detail to position myself exactly where I needed to be." The revelation hit Richard like a physical assault. You lied about everything. Not about David. Not about my love for him. Not about being raised by Dona Rosa. Camila's eyes glistened with carefully restrained tears. But about passively accepting humiliation for 2 years while conducting my investigation into who destroyed my family? Yes, I lied about that. I lied with every subservient, yes, sir, and every lowered gaze. Richard staggered his feet and crossed the window on unsteady legs. "What else did you uncover?" Dr. Patricia Kellerman didn't operate alone. Camila flipped one of the photographs, revealing a complex bank document covered in highlighted transactions. She received regular payments from an offshore account linked to the Hartwell Corporation. Do you know who the CEO of Hartwell is, Mr. Hamilton? The name echoed in Richard's mind like a death knell. James Hartwell. My business partner for 20 years. Your partner who repeatedly pressured you to sell your company's shares for a fraction of their actual value. Camilla placed another photograph on the table, this one showing a series of property transactions. Your partner who personally recommended that specific private school where David had his accident. Your partner who suggested Dr. Patricia Kellerman to expedite all the red tape after the tragedy. Richard's legs gave way completely, forcing him to grab the windowsill for support. James stood beside me at the funeral. He wept with me. He offered me his shoulder to cry on when you signed documents transferring your company's shares for a pittance because you were deemed emotionally unstable to make sound business decisions. Camilla added with cold precision. $20 million in shares sold for $2 million. Quite the bargain, wouldn't you say? Camilla's phone rang, breaking the heavy silence. She answered quickly. Marcus, yes, I'm with him now. You can come in. Who's Marcus? Richard asked, turning from the window. Marcus Henderson, investigative journalist for the Washington Tribune. Camilla pocketed her phone. He's also been my fiancé for 3 years. He's been investigating the child trafficking ring that sold David while I've been investigating the financial trail. The front door opened. A black man in his mid-30s entered carrying a backpack laden with equipment. He was tall and elegant, with a commanding presence that immediately filled the room. Richard Hamilton. Marcus greeted him formally, extending his hand. I imagine Camilla has briefed you on our investigation. Richard shook his hand mechanically, still reeling. You've been working together for how long? 6 years, Marcus replied, placing the heavy backpack on the table with a solid thump. Ever since Camilla discovered the connection between David's disappearance and an international child trafficking ring catering to wealthy families. International? Richard whispered, his voice barely audible. Marcus opened the backpack, revealing professional recording equipment, cameras, and files neatly organized in protective sleeves. Patricia Kellerman was merely a low-level operative in the hierarchy. This operation involves judges, social workers, private school administrators, executives from major corporations, people you would never suspect in 1,000 years. Camilla approached Richard, her expression softening slightly. David wasn't the only victim, Mr. Hamilton. We found documented evidence of at least 40 cases over the past 20 years. Children from broken homes, orphans, boys and girls who simply vanished from the system without a trace. And they all ended up with affluent families willing to pay between $500,000 and $2 million for a child with no documented past. No relatives who would come asking questions, Marcus added, connecting a discreet microphone to sophisticated recording equipment. Richard collapsed heavily into the armchair, his hands covering his face. What do you want from me? Justice, Camilla replied simply, and your cooperation in dismantling the entire network. Marcus activated the equipment, checking signal levels on a small monitor. James Hartwell is organizing an auction this week, not for artwork or vintage automobiles, for children. Richard's head snapped up. What? 10 boys and girls between the ages of 6 and 12 will be auctioned to pre-selected families, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the horrific nature of what he was describing. We have the location, the time, and the guest list. How could you possibly know this? Richard asked, horrified. Because I infiltrated his inner circle 2 years ago, Camilla revealed. Using a false identity, I presented myself as a representative of a wealthy European family interested in quick, discreet adoptions without bureaucratic complications. James believed completely that I was just another client willing to pay premium prices for a child without legal entanglements. Marcus displayed a video recording on his tablet. We have hours upon hours of recorded conversations. James confessing explicit details about the operation, mentioning you specifically as the idiot who financed his own losses, discussing expansion plans to other countries. Richard watched excerpts from the recordings, seeing his supposed friend of 2 decades laughing as he described how he manipulated Richard's grief to make millions of dollars. That son of a bitch, Richard breathed, his hands clenching into fists. "The auction takes place tomorrow night," Camilla said, looking him directly in the eyes. "At an isolated mansion approximately 2 hours from the city. We have a singular opportunity to catch the entire operation in action, with buyers, sellers, and the children as living evidence. But we need someone with credibility to gain entry," Marcus explained. "Someone James Hartwell trusts implicitly. Someone he would never suspect of working against him." Richard understood immediately. "You want me to attend the auction?" "We want you to help save 10 children who are about to have their lives stolen," Camilla corrected gently. "Just as David's life was stolen. Just as our families were destroyed." The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard studied these two people who had dedicated years of their lives pursuing a justice he'd never had the courage to seek himself. "If I do this," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion, "if I help you, is there any chance, any possibility that we'll find David?" Camilla and Marcus exchanged a meaningful glance that Richard couldn't quite interpret. "Mr. Hamilton," Camilla said softly, choosing her words carefully, "there's something about David we haven't told you yet. Something you need to know before you decide if you're truly ready for the complete truth." Richard felt his heart begin to race. "What is it? Tell me." Marcus paused the recording equipment he'd been setting up. "Perhaps it would be best if you sat down again to hear this." As Richard braced himself for a revelation that would clearly alter everything, one desperate question hung in the air. After 17 years of carefully constructed lies, could the truth about David possibly be even more shocking than everything he'd already discovered? "David is alive." The words left Camilla's lips as Richard's face turned completely ashen, all blood draining away. "Not just alive. He's being held for tomorrow night's auction." The world stopped spinning. Richard felt as though he'd been struck in the stomach with tremendous force. All air expelled from his lungs. "W's what?" Marcus rotated his tablet, displaying a surveillance photograph. A tall young man with golden blonde hair and piercing blue eyes was being escorted by security personnel toward a black van. Even at 29, his features were unmistakably identical to those in the portrait hanging in the mansion. David Hamilton, now cataloged as Premium Product 001 in James's auction materials, Marcus explained with clinical detachment. He's the centerpiece of tomorrow's auction, marketed as a second chance for families who've lost a child in tragic circumstances. Richard couldn't form coherent words. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to process the impossible information. But how? Where has he been all these years? With a wealthy family in Chicago who paid $2 million for him when he was 12, Camilla replied, making no attempt to soften the brutal cruelty of the truth. They raised him as their only child, provided him with an elite education at the finest schools. But when they discovered he was questioning his own identity, investigating his forgotten past, they returned him, Marcus finished, as though David were merely defective merchandise. 6 months ago, David began actively searching for information about his biological family. The purchasing family panicked and contacted James Hartwell to resolve their problem. Richard sank deeper into his chair, completely devastated. "My son spent 17 years believing he belonged to another family. And now he's being prepared to be sold again like property, which is precisely why we need to act now," Camilla said, taking his trembling hands in hers. "But this time, we'll be the ones purchasing his freedom." Richard looked utterly confused. "How is that possible?" Marcus smiled for the first time in the entire conversation. "For 2 years, Camilla has meticulously built an impeccable identity as a representative of the European Vanderbilt family. James Hartwell doesn't just trust her, he considers her his most valuable client. I told him I was specifically seeking a well-educated blonde young adult to be adopted by a childless European couple," Camilla explained. "When David appeared in his catalog, James contacted me personally, offering me a special arrangement with premium pricing." Richard felt a strange mixture of horror and hope battling inside him. "And the plan?" "Tomorrow night, you attend the auction as James's honored guest," Marcus detailed. "He always invites select wealthy friends to observe the transactions. It's his method of expanding his client base. You've received invitations before, but you've always declined them. This time you accept." Camilla continued. Tell him you're finally ready to move past your grief and might consider a new adoption. James will be absolutely delighted. Richard nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the strategy. And during the auction, Marcus revealed state-of-the-art recording equipment. Tiny cameras and sophisticated microphones barely visible to the naked eye. You'll be wearing discreet surveillance devices. Every word, every transaction will be recorded in high-definition audio and video. Camilla will make the winning bid for David, but that's only the beginning, Marcus continued. The FBI is already fully aware of the operation, Camilla revealed, her expression deadly serious. They simply need conclusive evidence to arrest the entire network simultaneously, across multiple states. When James accepts my payment for David and hands over the fraudulent transfer documents, we'll have everything we need to bring down the entire operation. Richard took a deep, shaky breath. What if something goes catastrophically wrong? What if they somehow discover who you really are? That's precisely why you're essential to this plan, Marcus said. James trusts you completely, without reservation. If anything seems suspicious or unusual, your presence will validate everything. He'll never suspect a trap, with you standing beside Camilla as a character witness. Camilla's phone rang sharply in the quiet room. She answered immediately. Detective Morrison. Yes, he's agreed. Perfect. We'll be ready. Who was that? Richard asked as she ended the call. The FBI, Marcus reported. They confirmed they've located the other 10 children who will be auctioned tomorrow night. They're currently being held in a warehouse approximately 15 minutes from a mansion where the auction takes place. Camilla stood and walked to the window, her silhouette framed against the fading daylight. Mr. Hamilton, I need you to understand something crucial. Tomorrow night isn't only about saving David. It's about dismantling a network that has destroyed hundreds of families over the past 20 years. How many people are involved in this? Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus consulted his files, flipping through pages of documentation. 17 people confirmed so far. Judges who expedite fraudulent adoptions, social workers who falsify records, private school administrators who report false deaths, executives from major corporations who facilitate money laundering, doctors who forge death certificates. A multi-million-dollar operation, Camilla added. James Hartwell isn't just the organizer. He's merely the visible tip of an enormous iceberg. Richard felt rage building inside him like a pressure cooker. How many families have suffered the way I have? 43 documented cases, Marcus replied grimly. Children who allegedly died in suspicious accidents, who disappeared without explanation from the welfare system, who were kidnapped from low-income families, all sold to affluent families who wanted children without the inconvenience of legal red tape. Richard's phone rang, the sound jarring in the tense atmosphere. James Hartwell's name appeared on the screen. Answer it, Camilla whispered urgently. Act completely normal. We'll listen to everything through the recording equipment. Richard took several deep breaths to steady himself and answered. James, how are you? Richard? What perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. The familiar voice sounded unusually excited. I have a special invitation for tomorrow evening. An exclusive event that I think might interest you. What kind of event? Richard asked, working to keep his voice casual and neutral. Something that might address what we discussed regarding your loneliness since David's passing. James continued smoothly. An opportunity to, how shall I phrase this delicately, expand your family through discreet and efficient channels. Richard glanced at Camilla, who nodded encouragingly. I'm interested in hearing more details. Excellent. It's a private gathering at my country estate. A few very carefully selected families presenting exceptional opportunities for rapid adoption, James explained, unable to disguise the excitement in his voice. No bureaucratic red tape, no endless waiting periods, no complicated background investigations. That sounds perfect, Richard said, each word a necessary deception. I knew you'd understand the appeal. Oh, and Richard, there's a particularly special opportunity tomorrow evening. A young man with exceptional education, impeccable appearance, fascinating background. He immediately reminded me of David when he was a teenager. Richard felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but maintained a steady voice. That sounds quite promising. Then it's confirmed. Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, my country house. Dress elegantly but discreetly. We don't want to attract attention. And Richard brings substantial funds. Considerable funds. James disconnected the call. Richard remained holding the phone, processing the conversation. He actually said the young man reminds him of David as a teenager, Richard whispered, his voice breaking. It's worse than that, Camilla replied, retrieving her phone and showing him archived messages. For months, James has been sending me photographs of David, telling me he would be absolutely perfect for my European client. He knows exactly who he's selling, Mr. Hamilton. This isn't accidental. It's calculated cruelty. Marcus assembled the final pieces of equipment. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, you'll arrive at our secure location to be fully equipped with cameras and microphones. At 7:30, Camilla arrives at the mansion as a Vanderbilt representative. At 8 o'clock, you arrive as James's honored guest. And at 10 o'clock, Camilla added, her voice hard as steel, when the FBI raids that mansion, James Hartwell will be arrested along with every single client, buyer, and accomplice present. 17 people who transform human suffering into profit. Richard stood up, feeling a determination he hadn't experienced in years coursing through his veins. And David? What happens to him? Camilla smiled genuinely for the first time since this conversation began. David goes home, Mr. Hamilton, to his real home, to the family that never stopped loving him, even without knowing he was alive all these years. Marcus packed away the equipment carefully. There's something else you need to prepare yourself for tomorrow. When James presents David for auction, you'll have to pretend you don't recognize him. You'll have to look at your own son and show no emotion whatsoever. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done in your entire life, but it will be the last lie you'll ever have to tell, Camilla added softly, touching his shoulder with unexpected gentleness. Because after tomorrow, the complete truth about the last 17 years will be exposed to the world. As the three of them prepared for the night that would irrevocably change everything, one agonizing question lingered in the air. Would Richard be able to look his son directly in the eyes after almost 2 decades of separation and successfully pretend he was a complete stranger? Because sometimes, to save those we love most deeply, we must first pretend we don't know them, even when our hearts are breaking to finally see them alive and standing right there before us. The operation was executed with surgical precision. At exactly 10:17 p.m., as James Hartwell handed David's forged transfer documents to Camilla with a satisfied smile, saying, "Congratulations on your acquisition, Mrs. Vanderbilt. He'll make an excellent addition to your family." Dozens of FBI agents stormed through every entrance of the mansion simultaneously. FBI, hands in the air. This operation is over. Panic erupted instantaneously. Millionaire buyers scattered in all directions, desperately seeking escape routes. Security personnel reached for weapons they'd never draw. James stood completely frozen, the fraudulent papers still clutched in his hands, staring at Camilla with absolute incredulity. Who are you?" he stammered, his face contorted with confused rage. "I'm Camilla Santos," she replied calmly, removing the expensive blonde wig to reveal her natural dark curls. "David Hamilton's sister. And you, James Hartwell, are under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering." Richard watched everything unfold through the FBI's live camera feeds, tears streaming down his face as he saw David being escorted by federal agents, not as a criminal, but as a victim finally being liberated from captivity. When father and son finally met at the police station 3 hours later, time itself seemed to stop completely. David, now 29 years old with the face of a man, but the lost expression of the child he'd been, looked at Richard. Something profound awakened in his eyes, a flicker of recognition buried beneath years of manufactured memories. "Dad," he whispered, tears beginning to stream down his face. "Is it really you?" "Yes, son. It's me," Richard responded, his voice breaking entirely. He pulled David into an embrace, holding him as though he might disappear again if he loosened his grip for even a moment. "I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Not for a single moment." 6 months later, The trial of James Hartwell made national headlines across every major news network. 17 individuals were convicted on multiple charges. The child trafficking ring was completely and permanently dismantled. Federal prosecutors called it the largest operation of its kind ever prosecuted in the United States. David opened a support center for families of missing children, dedicating his life to ensuring no other family would suffer as it had. Richard sold half of his considerable assets to fund the project, finally finding purpose in his wealth. Camilla became the center's director, at last using her investigative skills to protect families instead of secretly investigating them from the shadows. You know what I've learned through all of this? David said during the center's grand opening ceremony, looking between Camilla and Richard with profound gratitude. Family isn't defined by blood or legal documents. It's defined by who fights for you when everyone else has given up. It's about who refuses to accept loss when the world says acceptance is the only option. James Hartwell, now serving a life sentence without possibility of parole, lost absolutely everything. His fortune seized through civil forfeiture, his reputation destroyed beyond repair, his freedom permanently revoked. His final message to Richard, delivered through his attorney, read simply, "I never imagined you possessed the courage to do this." Richard kept the letter without composing a reply. Some forms of revenge require no words, no response, no acknowledgement. Justice itself was answer enough. The real victory wasn't destroying James Hartwell's life and empire. It was rebuilding a family that time, cruelty, and human evil had tried to erase forever. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to give up on those we love, even when the entire world insists it's impossible, even when years have passed, even when hope seems foolish. Because everyone deserves a second chance to reunite with those who never stopped searching, never stopped believing, never stopped loving them.